World first Molten Core clear in Season of Mastery by WHO and Alliance Guild in Week 2, not Week 1 like in Classic WoW back in 2019, but instead the second week, which actually speaks to the increased difficulty of the raid, because in Season of Mastery, getting max level is certainly faster with the 40% increased experience from quests, group quests, dungeon quests, even more. What made Molten Core so much harder? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But for now, let's talk about the raid composition that achieved world first. So here we got a graph. We can see warriors. We had 10 of them. 10 warriors. So this is the class we saw the most frequent in this guild, or in this raid composition. Warriors. We kind of aren't surprised by this, right? We knew melee meta back in the day. Classic WoW's a melee meta. Warriors are dominating, and they're continuing to dominate. We can see, we actually see not that many rogues. We only see 4 rogues, and we do see 7 mages as well. We knew warriors, mages, rogues would all be very, very good. But what's actually interesting about these composition numbers is look at the number of hunters. We see 6 hunters. That's almost the same amount of hunters as there are mages. So we see a lot of hunters coming into Molten Core for this world first clear. Hunter. Is it the new meta? Maybe. We're actually going to talk about that. We saw Paladins get those Paladin buffs, very important. Only 2 Warlocks. Warlocks, many speculated, would be the new meta. But we're actually going to talk about why they might not be. And of course, you got 1 Druid, you want Mark of the Wild, you get that battle res, all that good stuff there as well. Of course, priests are fantastic healers. We got 6 priests. Very, very good. So, 15 range DPS versus 14 melee DPS. You can kind of say, is it really a melee meta? Well, let's look at some of the numbers, we can see the warlock, the logs, posted those in the description below, but we can see here, so a warrior topped the DPS meter. I don't think anyone's too surprised about that. But what is kind of surprising is that Hunter is the most frequent class in the top 10 for highest DPS for all encounters, holding 4 spots in the top 10. But during boss encounters only, hunters were everywhere. It was crazy, with 6 out of the 10 top DPS being hunters. 6 out of 10. So, if we look at why this might be the case, the debuff limit was removed, right? If we look at what damage contribution, Serpent Sting really only contributed about 2 to 3% increase in damage, which, let's be honest, we didn't expect Serpent Sting to be a game changer, right? Being able to use that. So I don't think we can say that. The removal of world buffs, I think, could definitely help close the gap between melee DPS and other classes that maybe don't benefit as much from world buffs. But I think what is really the big game changer here, which made hunters so good in Molten Core, and I think throughout Season of Mastery they will be, well, at least in this phase, is the current itemization, including bloodseeker. This is a very powerful crossbow for hunters. It's got that agility, it's got nice DPS, good damage, and it's fantastic. It's not too hard to get. You just got to do some AVs. So I think all of that combined makes Hunter a very, very powerful class for Molten Core, and I think it's going to be kind of a staple going into Molten Core. It's also super easy to level, so no reason why you can't pick up a bunch of them. It's quite popular as well in Season of Mastery. So that is pretty exciting. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what made Molten Core so hard. A lot of the changes, people have speculated about, and maybe it's not super clear. There's also I'm going to put a link that lists all the changes, but really, the changes aren't too massive. We can probably cover these kind of quickly. So number 1, world buffs not in the game during raids, so that makes it harder, of course. Lucifron has 2 additional Flamewalker protectors, makes it slightly harder, right? Magmadar, this is actually an interesting mechanic. It's going to summon 2 additional core hounds next to the boss about 20 to 30 seconds after you start the encounter, and then every minute 2 more core hounds will spawn. Lava bombs going to be cast much more frequently, which will leave many more flames of patches of flame on the ground. It's going to make the fight a little bit harder. Gehennas, similar to Lucifron, is also going to be accompanied by 2 additional flame wakers, and then Rain of Fire is going to be cast much more frequently. That's not too crazy. Gar has kind of a cool ability. He summons a Magmakin that will charge a random raid member and then explode, which is kind of cool. And also notice, for that Gar fight, Warlocks are nice for banishes. Notice this raid only took 2 Warlocks. That could be potentially for just Curse of Recklessness and Curse of Elements, right? Help the physical damage dealers like hunters, hunters, warriors, rogues, things like that. And then Curse of Elements for the mages. That's really going to help. Curse of Shadows in the game. I don't know if you play a Warlock, but in TBC, Curse of Shadow and Curse of Elements get combined. That Shadow resistance reduction gets built into Curse of Elements. So you actually had to get that to benefit Warlocks. Curse of Shadow in original Classic. Baron Geddon, this is kind of the big one. When he casts Living Bomb, it's where one player needs to get away from every other player because they explode, kind of get shot up in the air. It's going to happen to 3 random raid members instead of 1. That's a big one. It's going to be much harder because, there's usually like the designated go stand over here spot. There's going to be 3 of those designated stand over here spots instead of 1. At the end of Living Bomb in Inferno, a flame patch will be left on the ground that deals damage to anyone standing in it. So that go stand over there, you got a bomb on you. It's going to change every time. This fight I can certainly see be a step up in difficulty. So excited to see some of those. Shazra, after casting Blink, he'll be leaving behind an image of Shazra, which will continuously cast Arcane Explosion for the remainder of the encounter. Now, if you're not familiar with Shazra, this Arcane Explosion is huge. This is a huge Arcane Explosion. So this is going to be a very fun positioning fight. Just moving him to different spots. Hopefully you can burn him down pretty quickly. I don't think he's that hard or has a big HP pool. But anyways, you don't want to get too many image of Shazra, I'm sure, or else the encounter could probably get, out of control. Golmag the Incinerator. The Rager pets are now permanently buffed by Golmag's Trust, increasing their physical damage and attack speed. He'll also now cast Earthquake throughout the fight, whereas before would only be cast below 10% total health remaining. So you've got Earthquakes going on the entire fight. It's going to increase the difficulty for sure. The Sulfuron Harbinger and the 4 Flame Waker Priests now all have a shared health pool. It's actually crazy. Inspire has been buffed, increasing the damage output by a significant margin. In addition, any of the priests or Sulfuron can inspire one another, meaning they need to all be spread out. So, Inspire, a buff that you don't want to have cast, increasing damage output by a significant margin. Majordomo Executus, the Flamewalker Elite now have a Fireball Volley spell. Flamewaker Priests become immune to crowd control after 2 deaths instead of 4. Surprisingly, Majordomo was one of the easier encounters in the latest version of Molten Core, which is interesting. You'd think this would be pretty tough, but honestly, with all the things that they've done, I can kind of see that that doesn't seem too crazy compared to some of the other fights. Now, for the big one, Ragnaros, he will force Submerge phase when total health remaining reaches 50%. After Ragnaros respawns from the Submerged phase, and for the remainder of the fight, Son of Flame can spawn in random locations from the lava. That's insane, right? For the remainder of the fight, that's tough. There's also a 60-minute timer displaying time remaining before Ragnaros withdraws and despawns. So those are all the changes that make Molten Core harder.